All right, all right. I am so excited about today's guest. Today I'll be speaking with Rosemary Card, aka Rosie. Rosie is an entrepreneur, author, and passionate advocate for women's rights, inclusion, and for having nuanced cultural conversations, something that we really need right now. She is the founder of Q Noir and Cardware and the author of Model Mormon and House of Light. She firmly believes in the power of education and open conversation to bridge divides and promote understanding. Rosemary lives in Salt Lake with her husband, 1-year-old son, and 2 dogs. Welcome to the show, Rosie.
So I'm a born and raised Utah native. We spent a few years in my childhood in New York, but for the most part, I'm here. I live in Salt Lake, have for the last several years, and yeah, I'm a mom, a dog owner, and I do work on social media, and then I'm an entrepreneur.
I love following your social media. I just really appreciate your openness and honesty. And how old is your child?
He's 1.5.
Awesome. And how has it been adjusting, having a new baby?
You know what? I keep saying that I don't know how any parents are doing anything, and everyone laughs and says, like, oh, you'll figure it out. And I'm always like, exactly when is that figured out thing going to kick in? So it's been a huge adjustment, but it's wonderful. And we're completely obsessed with him and just learning as we go.
I feel the same way because as a small business owner myself and an entrepreneur and just being so busy with work, and then I have so much respect for parents and especially for moms because it does feel like, especially in the first couple of years, like I know that there's a lot. I feel like millennial dads especially are a lot more engaged than the fathers of previous generations, but I have so much respect for the moms and the hustle that it takes. So kudos to you for keeping everything going. And I mean, bringing it back to policy as I think about the US Senate campaign, I'm curious to hear from you what you think could help make parents transition into parenthood, those first couple of years. What would you like to see from Utah's next US Senator for that realm?
I think in Utah, there's this, not everyone is Mormon. And I don't even know if it's technically a majority, but a very, very large majority of our representatives are members of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And for a long time, the church has taught that, women should stay at home, not be in the workforce or in the labor force. And that's starting to change, but the effects of those generations of teachings are still definitely very prominent. And I think it's really important for us to all realize that, according to the Utah Women in Leadership Project, 75.5% of women with children under 18 are in the labor force.
Wow.
75.5% of women. And women make up 0.7% of the total labor force. So things like paid family leave, access to childcare, like those are not things that a minority of Utahns need. Those are topics that directly affect the majority of Utahns and the vast majority of mothers with children under 18. So I think those are things, especially as a state that we like to say that we are a family-friendly state. Those are extremely family-friendly issues that are getting like zero attention from our current leaders.
Yeah, that's so interesting, that stat. I would have thought that it was lower, but I do think also it's really an interesting time right now with like this social media wave of women that are choosing to become trad wives or they're choosing to do that. And I think it's cool when a woman can decide what she wants to do to be the best version of herself. Like, I think celebrating choice and celebrating that when it is a choice is really important. But like you said, I do think it is important to keep the needs of so many working parents in mind because my other thing is like, how can parents afford to only have one parent working with the cost of housing today and groceries in Utah, right? It feels
Yeah,
like you need
yeah.
to have 2 parents working.
And the vast majority of people are dual income households because it's an absolute necessity. And I just think it's so important that we understand and that we have better education on the reality of what most Utah families are dealing with, rather than these idealistic perceptions that are mostly kind of like passed on from previous generations. And those stats that I shared earlier are not even taking into the idea of all of the labor that women who are stay-at-home parents or any men that are stay-at-home parents, all of that labor is significantly contributing to Utah's economy. And so, like, women's issues are so important and they are a huge player in the economy. And it just is, it's so crazy to me that it feels like it's treated like a special interest group, and something that like is nice and maybe we'll get some points if we mention it. But it's not taken seriously.
No, I feel that for sure. And one of the transformative classes I took at the University of Utah my senior year was a class called Family Economic Issues. And it was really interesting how they spoke about stay-at-home moms, or they would call them home production specialists, because when you take when you put an economic value on the replacement cost for that labor, it's like hundreds of thousands of dollars a year. So I really appreciate that you pointed that out, because I often feel like in being a feminist, which I know like that word has so much baggage, but I don't think it needs to. It means someone who cares about human rights, really, because women's rights are
Right.
human rights. Yes. But
Feminism means believing that women are humans.
exactly. So I wish it didn't have the baggage it has, but I feel like there's often forces trying to like get us pitted against each other too, where it's like,
Oh, yeah.
no, being in the house is better. No, being in the workforce. But really, it just is like the cool thing about being a woman in 2024 is that you do have a lot you have a bit more freedom to choose than women did in the 50s. So it's like if you decide to choose to be a stay-at-home mom, that's awesome. And you're contributing so much to our society. And if you're a working mom, you're awesome and you're contributing so much to society. And if you decide you don't want to be a mom or you can't be a mom, you're also awesome. And so I feel like we need to have more of that rhetoric rather than these like forces trying to divide us. And I just really appreciate those points that you brought up. And so have you always lived in Salt Lake or have you lived in other parts of the state?
So I lived in St. George. I went to my first year and a half at what's now Utah Tech. And so my first year and a half of college at Utah Tech. And then I lived in Provo because I graduated from BYU, lived in Sandy, Cottonwood Heights, Sugar House. So lots of different places within the Salt Lake area. But yeah, Salt Lake, Provo, St. George.
Have you seen different attitudes towards the role of women or family in these different parts of the state?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's very interesting because as a BYU student, you're in kind of a little, I don't know what, I want to say microclimate, but it's like you're in a little bubble. And it has I think, more and more a more progressive stance. In St. George, definitely is different than Salt Lake as far as opinions and stances. But it's interesting to me that the realities of what women are facing don't change. So whether you are in St. George or Sanpete County or Salt Lake or Logan, these women still need to provide for their families. These women are still providing for families. These women are still contributing to the economy, whether or not the community has more of a conservative emphasis or is more supportive of women outside of the home. Regardless, that's the reality that these women are facing.
It's really insightful. What is your favorite thing about Utah? Having
Oh my
lived all
gosh.
over the state. Or your favorite things. You don't have to give me just one because it is a pretty great place to live, despite
It's a
some of the
great place to
challenges
live.
facing women here.
Yeah. And I always like to say that like Utah's a very easy place to live. I love the access that we have. Of course, that's always the first thing that people say, right? Like the access we have to all different parts of nature and different environments. And I love it. I don't know. I would probably say my favorite part of living in Utah is being as close as possible to House Backbone Grill. I don't
Oh,
know if you've
that's
ever been there, but it's the most delicious restaurant in the world.
we did Thanksgiving there a couple years ago as a family. We did a family road trip and stayed down there and took my folks into some slot canyons. It was so special.
So, so wonderful. What those women have created is, I think, just like a really beautiful example of what female entrepreneurs in Utah can and are doing every day.
It's great seeing women-owned businesses thriving, and they certainly are. So, if you're eating there, what's your favorite? What are some of your favorite dishes?
Everyone, I tell everyone, no matter what, like plan ahead. And I'm always like, I save for this event eating there, because we're going to order as much as possible, but we're always going to get the genchaladas, um, get as many desserts as possible. And what do they call them? Like they're pepper biscuits. Like they're just to die for.
Yum, that sounds incredible. I'm now needing to plan a trip down there because
I know.
we've been to a lot of the states so far on the campaign and we're continuing to travel, but that needs to get escalated now. Our
Yeah.
trip
Jen,
to Boulder.
Jen and Blake will always take care of people. That's for sure.
That's great. And then you're also a big Swiftie. So I wanted to ask you, what are some of your favorite Taylor Swift songs?
Oh my gosh. So right now my current is it has to be Who's Afraid of Little Old Me from the new album.
Mm-hmm.
Just love that. But I am a Swiftie in the sense that I remember calling the radio and requesting Teardrops on my guitar um be played. And so I'm just like a fan of literally anything she does. She could put out a bar of soap and I would be a supporter.
I really like that little old me song. That's I
Yeah.
really relate to that one strongly because I feel
Yeah.
so often like when people look at me, they just have such low expectations too about what I'm capable of. And so I definitely relate really strongly to that song. And so
Yeah.
like we've spoke a little bit about some of the issues facing women in Utah and overall for men and women, like what are some of the challenges you see right now that the state is facing that you would like elected officials to address?
I mean, I feel like we a crucial things are our environment. I mean, water, the Great Salt Lake, air quality, all of those things are so, so important. And it's tricky because sometimes when you say those things, it's like, yeah, of course, but like, what does that actually mean? And I think for the average Utahn, that can get kind of intimidating to feel like, I don't know how do we change air quality? How what can I do to affect the Great Salt Lake? If I don't even have a lawn per se, I do. But if so many Utahns, I think it feels like what can I do? And so I feel like we really need representatives who are passionate enough about those topics to do the hard work to figure that out. Because the average Utahn is very busy. They can't become experts on air quality or water conservation, but we need leaders who are willing to, or at least to bring in the experts close to them so that we can have legislation and policy that will serve us.
Yeah, those are two really important ones that you talked about. And I think about the Great Salt Lake one all the time because of the public health threat that it's not a problem of the future either. There's a number of different air quality experts and scientists working on it, and there's already I think last year they determined that our snowpack melted 17 days sooner because of the impact of the dust on the snow, causing the snowpack to melt quicker. And that toxic dust is getting on our vegetables, it's getting in our lungs, and it's especially problematic for our children and for people of advanced ages. And so for those populations, but for all of us, it's a huge public health crisis. And I think the last two winters, particularly, like we've had such good snowfall that
Mm-hmm.
I think that the urgency of addressing the issue has been pushed off and delayed a little bit. But I'm really glad you brought up those things because they are huge issues facing women, families, children, all of us.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. And so that's a big part of our campaign is addressing. It's a big part of my work as an environmental advocate over the last
Mm-hmm.
decade and a half. I got my start working for Governor Gary Herbert's environmental advisor up at the Utah State Capitol in 2010. And it's been something we've been working on for a long time. But it's really frustrating here because our elected officials constantly use our taxpayer dollars to sue the EPA, who's trying to keep the air quality standards high. And so what concerns me a lot, and part of the reason I decided to run is seeing the extremism of the Republican Party. It's not even that they're like, oh, let's work with the EPA to see how we can hit these standards. They're like, no, we're going to sue them and use the taxpayer dollars to do that. And I was curious from you. I know you were really outspoken this legislative session about the bathroom bill in particular.
Mhm.
And I love the way you framed it because, and I'll let you speak to that, but well, maybe we'll start with that actually. What can you tell me about your positioning and how you were trying to advocate against this bathroom bill?
Yeah, I mean, I think first and foremost, it's so important when we talk about this to recognize that Utah does not have an epidemic or even what I would say, an issue of women being attacked in public restrooms. Like, that's not happening. Does that mean it doesn't happen ever? No, but it is not this massive issue that we need to buckle down on right now. So this bill gets passed down from a extreme conservative group called ALEC, but it was brought forward here in Utah, and it was kind of positioned as if like, hey, we're trying to protect women in bathrooms by keeping men out of bathrooms. And I just said, look, like as a woman in Utah, I've spent the vast majority of my life here. I've never been in a public restroom where a man walked in. And if one did, I probably wouldn't make a big deal out of it, but I would pay a little bit more attention. I would be aware of my surroundings, what was going on. But it's like, it's not an issue. It's never happened to me. But with the passing of this bill,
Yeah.
they're saying that trans men would be legally required to use women's bathrooms. So these are individuals who are completely male presenting, someone that you would pass on the street and not think twice about because they are a man, but they are a trans man. But legally, they would be required to use a woman's bathroom. So now, when we're using a public restroom and a man walks in, I don't know if this is a man that is a cis man that is going to be a danger to women or children in the bathroom. And it's important to note that if we're looking at the reality of numbers, it's cis men that are harming women, not trans men. Or I don't know if this is a trans man who is just trying to use the restroom, and legally he has to use that restroom now. And I found it so interesting because I went to speak in like when they opened it for public session or public comment. And I was standing next to two women who one represents a very conservative group here in Utah. And one was kind of a friend with her, and they were there to speak for the bill. And I just brought that forward. I said, like, hey, what are your thoughts on this? Because now if this bill passes that you're trying to pass, now trans men will have to use women's bathroom. And one of the women was like, no, like that won't be the case. And as I explained to her, I was like, no, that will actually be the case. And it was so interesting to me to realize that even the people coming to speak on the bill didn't actually realize what this bill would entail. I can talk for a long time on this topic, but I think we really just need to let trans individuals live in peace. And if we are really concerned about things that are actually affecting Utah women's lives, we need to look at the rates of violence from cis men, and things that we talked about earlier as far as paid family leave, access to childcare, healthcare, all of those things. Those are the things that are actually affecting women's lives, where the bathroom bill is the thing that was trying to affect one woman's life and getting her reelected.
Well, yes, I am 100% in agreement with you. And it was so frustrating this legislative session. I guess just in general, the last couple of years since the districts were redrawn and we have these like very gerrymandered districts. And now we have
Hmm.
the rise of more extremist leaders. And it's like,
Hmm.
I almost feel like, as an advocate and a community organizer, like I almost feel like if I go to the Utah legislature for a public comment, that if I present, they're going to be more likely to do the opposite of what I say just because they want to do it despite the people. Like it feels like we have so few ways to hold our elected officials accountable and to advocate for change and for progress and for the things we actually need them to address, and not all of these bills that are super creepy, really, when you think about the government policing who's going to which bathroom.
Yeah, and the thing is I don't feel like these bills or the extremism from so many of our representatives are accurate representations of the vast majority of Utahns. Most people are just trying to live their lives. They're just trying to be kind to their neighbors, and pay their bills and make sure their kids are happy. Like that is all they're trying to do. And the way that we have it set up, especially with the caucus system, it's very geared towards extremism. And it's very much geared to people that really should not be speaking for the majority of Utahns. And it's just so frustrating to see that our leaders are playing to extremism because of the system that they truly are continuing to perpetuate by like the redistricting and gerrymandering of the state and things like that.
Yeah, I just, this legislative session gave me so much anxiety, and I was like, what can we do? What can we do? And it's again part of the big reason that I'm running for office is I just feel like it's time for more people to step up, and regardless of their experience, like whatever your experience is, to the people who are listening, like whether you're a stay-at-home mom, educator, a teacher, whatever your background is, we desperately need your voice in politics and in government today, because it's not, we're not on the right track. We're definitely, I feel like we're really on the wrong track.
I
So
didn't do a thumb down, bud.
the
We're not
Zoom
on the right
reactions gave a thumbs down for those
the spirit of
listeners
Zoom.
on
Agreed.
audio. I know those reactions are so funny. I wanted to chat with you along these lines about gun violence and about common sense gun reform, because I know in Utah, like we're a strong Second Amendment state. People love they love their Second Amendment here. And I was curious, what are some of the common sense gun reforms you'd like to see as a mom and as a woman in the state?
Um, I think that we should make it at least as equally difficult as we require it to be driving a car to get a weapon. If we could at least make it on an equal level, require the background checks, safety measures, insurance policies, whatever it may be, we don't think twice about those requirements for driving a car. It's so crazy to me that we don't think more about it when it comes to buying a gun.
Mhm.
I grew up going and shooting guns with my cousins. I would say the vast majority of my family members, extended family members, have guns of some sort. Um, but I also have been a volunteer at the Sharing Place for 6 or 7 years, and they offer free support and grief counseling to grieving families, mostly children. Um,
Mhm.
and for my entire time at the Sharing Place, I have been involved in a group of children who are school aged, so 6 to 12, who are grieving loved ones who have died by suicide. And the vast majority of those involve guns. And in so many of these stories, um, if things like um, having a place for people going through mental health crisis to take their guns, um, things like ensuring safe storage, so that even children who are taught how to operate guns safely, that they do not have access to weapons, and that families. One thing that I think all parents need to do now is when your child goes into someone else's home, asking straightforward, are there guns in your home? How are they stored? And who else will be in the home at that time? Because we just we are losing too many people. We are losing too many children. And I think that lives and children are far more important than basically anything else.
Well, thank you for sharing that, and thank you for your work that you're doing there because my brother is a pediatrician and he has just been so upset about the lack of action on gun violence. And again, it's another reason why I'm running. And I think we need to stand up to these special interest groups, to the influence of the NRA, and make sure that our elected officials are accountable to the will of the people, not to the
Yeah.
will of these big corporations. Because when it comes down to it and you follow the money, and the polling, I thought there was some really interesting polling that the Deseret News did last year, or the year before,
Mm-hmm.
about Utahns' attitudes toward gun violence. And even in a state like Utah, the vast majority of people, I think it was over 70%, support the measures that you were just spoke to. So there's this huge disconnect right now between the will of the people and what and the track that our government is on. And so I hope that together we can help
Yeah.
correct the track. And so I wanted to ask if you're comfortable speaking about balancing religion and politics, because one of the things I admire about you is that you're very open and honest about sharing the reality of your work and being a member of the Latter-day Saints Church, and then also being outspoken against some of these bills. And so, how do you decide what to speak up on and what to let slide? And how do you kind of balance those roles?
Yeah. I mean, I don't see them really in conflict. And not that you're saying that they are. I feel like I speak up because of my faith. I It's because of my faith and because of in my upbringing in Christianity, specifically within the Mormon Church, that I feel so passionate about these topics. And as I'm an individual. I don't have a PR team. I am not an expert on all things, so I can't speak to all things.
Mhm.
But I think that far too often, especially women, receive the message that you shouldn't speak out on stuff, that you should be quiet on certain topics. Where if you look at some of our male elected officials, it's like this guy is no way more qualified than the vast majority of women. And so I think we all should be speaking out and we all should be getting involved in politics. There is nothing in our lives that isn't, quote unquote, political. Um, Things like access to food, religion, all of these things are political. And so, I guess to more directly answer your question, how do I balance those things? Um, I believe that my faith dictates how I live. It dictates the choices that I make. I do not believe that it should dictate what choices you make or what anyone else does or how anyone else lives their life. It's for me and for me only. And I believe that everyone should have the freedom and right to live their life according to their beliefs. And so I am really disappointed when I see elected officials, especially elected officials of my own faith, using their position to try to control how other people are able to live, whether or not they're able to marry who they want to marry, what reproductive choices they make, the choices they make with their bodies. That to me is a real big disappointment. And I think we have tons of room for improvement.
I think you should run for office. You would be
No.
such a great candidate. You would. You're so, I love how you spoke to that though, because
Well,
when
thank
we,
you.
I really do, because that ethic of care and compassion, and that willingness to take action and to advocate for the betterment of our society and our communities, like I believe that's the heart of faith. And so
Hmm.
thank you for speaking up and doing things that I mean, I know for me in my career in my life that sometimes when I've spoken up about things, there have been consequences, there have been
Totally.
real consequences. And I really appreciate your bravery and courage. And I do think you would make an excellent candidate if you decide to
Well,
do
thank
that
you.
someday. Yes, you're
Thank you.
such a
I ran
great
for city
leader.
council once and failed miserably, but one day maybe.
One day, well, if I can support you at all, I would be happy to, because I really believe we do need more women in leadership.
Oh,
And
100%.
I was curious, I wanted you to speak to that. Why do you think we need more women in leadership?
I think we need more women in leadership because men and women are different. And women think about things differently, we lead differently, we teach differently, we have different perspectives. And there are certain things that, as men don't experience life as women. And so if we are going to really represent our people and Americans as a whole, we need accurate representation. And that's, of course, across gender, sexuality, race. Um, we need a more diverse representation so that we can see problems and issues from all angles. I feel like it really deepens our pool of knowledge. Whereas if we only have like a majority of our leadership coming from one life experience, we have a pretty shallow pool of knowledge. And I feel like we're really doing ourselves a disservice by not trying to say like what other life experiences, what other perspectives can help us.
Yes, and
Yeah,
women have been so underrepresented in Congress, not in the US Senate, but also across like all levels of leadership. When you look at who's at the top, you still see an absence of women.
yeah,
And when we think about the plans that US senators are making and the budgets that they're working with, the trillions of dollars that they're allocating, these are decisions that are going to affect us for a long time. And so I would love to see more things like paid parental leave and subsidized childcare because people ask, how are we going to afford them? I would say, how can we not afford them?
right.
These things are good investments, and there's tons of data that shows that when we do them, they pay back dividends. And so it's good for families, it's good for Americans, it's good for Utahns. And yeah, we need to get it done. Women get things done.
Absolutely.
What do you think your vision for Utah's future is?
My vision for Utah's future, I don't know. I mean, that's a great question. I hope we just start really, what's the word? I will go back to like Utah and the family friendly state thing that a lot of our leaders like to uh, kind of use as a slogan. Um, I hope that we start to see more action in regards to that. I hope we start to see leadership that is not so concerned about Twitter engagement and more concern or like how much time they get on cable TV news, and leaders who actually care about the issues affecting all of the people that they represent. And I don't know. I hope we get the Olympics. That's part of my vision.
That would be good. That would be good. But we
Yeah.
definitely need to plan for all the transport. I mean, I think the transportation part of that would be huge to address because we already have so many challenges with transportation. And so hopefully they can get some budget for systemic public transportation as well.
No, absolutely. And I mean, our earlier conversation about air quality and things like that, it's like, do we want people coming into Utah during the winter and seeing the thick layer of smog that you can actually like breathe in and taste? Like, is that how we want to represent Utah? And if our snow is rapidly melting and covered in toxic dust, is that how we want to represent Utah? Like, it's so interesting how all of these issues are so intertwined. And are so crucial.
I wanted to ask your advice on something specifically related to my campaign. And you can, if you decide, like, you can decide to answer it or not. But I was curious,
Okay.
do you think that, like, can you give me any advice on how I could better reach out to you, to more Utah women, especially LDS women? And do you think that Utah women will consider voting for a Democrat?
Yeah, I mean, I think Utah women are getting more and more involved in the political process. And Utah women are more and more, I think they're just willing to vote for someone who's actually going to do what they say rather than just going for the extreme engagement type of things. So as far as reaching more, specifically Mormon women, I think stuff like this is really great. I'm trying to think about any like specific advice I would give you.
We can follow up with it too, but I was curious
Yeah.
about the Democrat thing because I know we have been on the surface, a solidly Republican state for a long time. And
Yeah.
I'm hoping I'm not a person like I don't love the whole two party system either. Like I'm a person of principle, not of party. And I don't like group think. Like when people get into these groups
Right.
and then they just go, like I like to think independently. And sometimes I like to rebel just because I want to, I don't like it when we all get in this groove and it's like, this is what you're expected to do. I've always been a little bit of a rebel. And so the whole two-party
Yeah.
system bothers me, but I don't think I could have registered as a Republican because it's just the way the party's headed. I mean, I have a lot of close family and like, obviously there's tons of Republicans that I know and love, but in
Right.
terms of like filing my candidacy, I couldn't do it. You know, people are like, why didn't you just register as a Republican? And I'm like, there's no way that
I think they would have seen through it pretty quickly.
they would have booed me off the stage. You know, it would, I think they would
No,
have too. And it's like the path to
no.
the ballot through the
Yeah.
Democratic Party. But I do really want people to know that I'm a person of principle, not of party. And I'm really excited to continue to have these conversations, especially with women around the state, because I feel like that's a really powerful place that we can invite people and we can talk about our shared values. So thank you for
Yeah.
speaking to that. And I just hope the Democratic, not that part doesn't scare people away because I'm
No,
really
and I
open to listening and learning
yeah,
and
and I
seeing
think
how we can be better.
The LDS Church leadership, I think it was within the last year, put out a statement that was like, we do not believe in essentially saying, do not vote simply party line. That you need to vote for someone who most represents that you think is like a good human, and most represents issues that you think they can actually like represent you on. And so I think they're trying to get membership, especially, but people in general, away from the idea of like, we're part of this party, we vote for it for the members of this party, no matter what. And I think it will take time, but I really like that direction that they are heading.
Thank you. Yeah,
Mm-hmm.
I think that the part of that quote I really loved is that I think they said voting straight party is a threat to democracy. And I
Mm-hmm. And
think
it's so true.
it's so true. I do really worry just about the attacks on our freedoms and kind of the backwards progress we're seeing, not only in Utah, but nationally. And
Yeah.
yeah, so cool. Well, how can we continue to follow your work and support your leadership?
So I am just mostly on Instagram at Rosie Card. I'm also on TikTok at Rosie Card, but Instagram is mostly where I'm at.
Amazing. Well, Rosie, thank you so much for taking the time to chat with me this afternoon. I really appreciate everything you're putting out there. And folks, really do give her a follow on the ground because I've just related to so many of the things you posted. You posted this video of like this clear dog bowl, this dog licking the water. And you were like, that's so inefficient. How does a dog drink that way? And I couldn't relate to that more.
It's so true. Well, and I just want to say thank you so much for all that you are doing. I know that campaigning is a brutal, brutal grind, and that you are putting yourself kind of at the front of a lot of attacks, and a lot of really difficult things. And so I really appreciate you, being brave enough and willing to kind of lead the way.
Thank you so much for saying that because being a candidate
Yeah,
has been really challenging, but
for
there's so
sure.
much on the line this election. And in general, I love this state. I love the people here so much. And I want to look at myself in the mirror when I'm older and be like, I know I did everything I could. Like I gave every last ounce of sweat and tears. And there's been a lot of sweat and there's been some tears and there hasn't been
Hmm.
too much bloodshed yet. And I hope to keep it that way. So thank you for acknowledging that. I really appreciate it. Thank you
Absolutely.
for running when you ran. And
For
thanks so
sure.
much for using your voice for a positive change. And I look forward to keeping in touch. Hope to meet you in real life soon and
You
really
too.
appreciate your time today. Thanks so much.
Absolutely. Thanks.